in our first about societal approach to disaster response and resilience build. I have the pleasure to introduce this session that we believe is crucial to respond to one of the main crises or an unseen crisis caused by the climate change. And I want to share with you some stats so you can keep it in mind during the conversation. Only in 2024, 9.8 million people around the world was displaced by catastrophes and disasters caused by climate change. In total, since 2008, we have 376 millions of people displaced in the world because climate change. And one of the main aspects connected with this displacement and with the consequence of the disasters and climate disasters are the elements associated to that. Every time that a village needs to be displaced, every time that a family needs to leave the house, they face challenge like poverty, they face challenge like human trafficking, they are open to be in risk, they are open to be victims of xenophobia, depending on when they landed. And there's many aspects connected to this challenge that we are not seeing and that we are not responding systemically. Because when we think about disasters, most of the approach around the world are approach to respond to the disaster through humanitarian aid. There is too many disasters around the world that never receive the attention that should receive. They are towns, villages, communities that are never revealed, but there are others that reveal their same community in the place where they know that the next year is going to happen again. So year after year, they are victims of floods or fires, and they rebuild everything again in the same place. And governments invest again in humanitarian aid instead of being prepared. So the session today is very important because we are going to speak about preparedness, we're going to speak about resilience, and we're going to speak about how to understand disasters and climate disaster in a different way. I am Gabriela Inés de Meneses. I have the pleasure of being co-chief facilitator of Catalyst Now. I'm also social entrepreneur with a few years of experience working in disasters, especially in Latin America, but also around the world. And I have the pleasure to introduce today our two experts that are going to be sharing. But first, I want to invite you to share in the chat your name, organization, where you are connecting from, and also to keep your camera on and your mic off so we can enjoy the session. Today, we have two of the founding members of Catalyst Now. And as I mentioned, two of the experts that are innovating in the way that we respond to disasters in the world. First, I want to introduce Meenakshi Gupta. She's a co-founder of Goonj. It's an award-winning nonprofit redefining development and civic engagement in India. Meenakshi is a commerce graduate with an advanced degree in advertising and public relationship. She spent 15 years of her life in the corporate sector, including 8 years as new publicity head of BBC South Asia before joining to Goonj full-time and before moving to the social sector. She is deeply committed to amplify the voices of the community, especially the women in the community, and addressing neglected issues like menstrual hygiene in rural India. She is focused on building civic engagement and mass communication to inspire participation in social change. And today we will learn a little bit more about the role of communication in disaster response. And it's also with us Anshu Gupta. Anshu is also a co-founder of Goonj and is one of the co-creators of the SARRD system that we're gonna explore today. Anshu is a system thinker and societal architect, reimagining how we can respond with dignity to disasters. Through Goonj, he transformed urban surplus into tools for rural resilience, emphasizing dignity, participation, and community leadership. He focused on awakening rural communities to their own worth and wisdom through deep listening and sustained dialogue. So the communities could be driving their solutions for their own challenge. His work spans menstrual dignity, climate response, and disaster recovery, all rooted in trusting communities to lead their own change. So I'm going to pass it over to Anshu to kick off our conversations today. Over to you, Anshu.
Thank you. Thank you, Gabby, and everyone. I think what we will do is that I will share this story that why are we doing what we're doing? I mean, because that's a huge connection with the disasters. To be honest, I mean, we often tell people that we didn't do Goonj, but Goonj happened to us. I mean, that's the story of many of us. And to be honest, when we started, the very core statement I still remember, we used to say that why do we, need a disaster to stand with people? Because half the world in any case does not need a disaster, because economic and social poverty is an ongoing disaster. And I think COVID, COVID was a proof of that. But then somehow the journey happened, and somehow we realized that no, I mean, yes, economic poverty, social poverty are disaster, but then the other disasters also add whole lot of grief in the life of people, and it becomes much more challenging for people. So my journey started on a very basic issue of clothing personally. And so in my journalism days, and some of you must have heard this story at various forums, but let me just repeat it to you because that has a direct connection with what we're doing right now. So when I moved from a small town to the city of Delhi, one of the things which started troubling was actually winters, okay, and the extreme cold. Not that I didn't have enough. I fortunately come from a privileged family. I had enough. But when you see people on the roads, you see a lot of people, going through a tough phase, and that's what we see in half the world at the end of the day. And then by chance, I met with a person who used to pick up unclaimed dead bodies. Right. So if a homeless person dies due to certain reasons, right, this person will actually support the local administration and police. And in those days, way back in 1991, he was paid 20 rupees and 2 meter of white cloth per dead body. 20 rupees is just, you can say, quarter of a dollar. So I started spending time with him, and I realized that was my first exposure to the homelessness, my first exposure that what is this all about, my first exposure to the migration, that why does the forced migration happen, and also before people settle down in a good life or in slum or wherever, many of them go through a tough phase, and many of them die due to various reasons, because of ailments, because of lack of something. And this is where Habib Bhai used to play the role. So while talking to him, two statements came up, which became a big story that time. One, when Habib Bhai, this person actually said that in winters his work goes up, and many times he has so much of work that he cannot handle it. And the work was to pick up dead bodies. Right? And then I realized that in a cycle of 24 hours, in whatever range he was able to go, he actually used to pick up 10 to 12 dead bodies in winters versus 4 to 5 in summers. And my immediate response was that people are dying because of cold. Right? I mean, to be honest, till say 5-6 years back, we were not even talking about weather kind of disaster or extreme weather disaster. This is still a very new phenomena. In those days, my perception was that people are dying because of cold. But then one fine day I realized that no, it's not just the cold, because if the cold kills people, I would have died. If someone else dies, it's not just the cold, but lack of clothing. That started our journey on clothing. Because the only difference between me and that person who died was not the temperature or anything, but a layer. In the series, their daughter actually said that when I feel cold, I hug the dead body and sleep. She further says that it does not trouble me, it does not turn around. you do realize the importance of clothing. You do realize that clothing has never been a subject, a development subject. It has always, we have taken it for granted. Okay. Although we identify people, whether someone is poor, rich, whatever, on the basis of cloth, but we never considered it an issue to work on, which Goonj picked up 26 years back, and we're trying to work on it. But you also realize that even winters are not considered a disaster. And I'm talking about literally 1991, 92. Those days. Winters are also not considered a disaster at all. Uh, Winters death are actually the most common deaths. Suffering is the most common suffering. And we don't even talk about it. We don't have actual figures across the globe, although it's, in many cases it's a highly preventable death or suffering. So that's how the journey started. Now, with time, we also realize is that uh, with the winters and with the, as we say, economic and social poverty, what is compounding, what is becoming a much bigger problem is actually all these natural disasters which come in the shape of earthquake, floods. And to be honest, in the very beginning of our career in Goonj, or our work in Goonj, we also saw the first time tsunami. And I still remember that in those days, many of us didn't even know that tsunami, when you spell tsunami, it actually starts with T. I still remember drafting the first communication with SUNAMI, and then because that was such a new disaster in our life, and India suffered majorly. And then you saw the consequences that how if you suffer from a disaster, how the migration happens in a big way, how you get into the lifelong debt for forever, how the studies of your children really suffer because the priorities change, and the instead of growth, the priorities actually become the survival that time. We also realize that a lot of these disasters can be handled well in advance, whether you call it preparedness or you call it mitigation, whatever we call it. But a lot can be even today when we are in the middle of something where uh, you know controlling whatever is happening in the climate change is looks almost impossible, because we have already done enough blunders. Now we are just facing the consequences of that, but still we feel that a lot can happen. So a very beautiful initiative came up in this journey. We call it Cloth for Work, which is a symbolic name. So what we do, we collect huge amount of used unused material, which is now popularly known as circularity. That's a new buzzword. Cloth, utensil, footwear, door, window, anything and everything which can be reused and which should live its own life, which should not go in the landfills and create havoc. That comes to us. It goes through very rigorous process of matching the needs of people. Then we go to hundreds and thousands of villages, and that's where we start asking people to pick up the issues which are bothering them. And a large number of people actually pick up the issues of reviving ponds, cleaning water bodies, doing mass level plantation. So all the environment, climate, infrastructure kind of work which people pick up, they work on those issues, for many days. And after that work, they receive this entire family kit which we create out of material. So if you see, there are 3 C's in our work, as we say, and which is the most important part of handling or working on any disasters. The first one, of course, is the circularity, where because we collect this material, it doesn't go in the landfills and all that. Second is the community, because community is the decision maker in all these processes. And third, and the most important part, is the climate. So when you revive a water body, you know that the drought can be handled in a better way. When you create a whole lot of channels for the waters, which are dead, which are closed, as a part of Cloth for Work, you also know that people can now tackle the floods in a much better way, and the possibility of floods is much lesser. If I pick up the data of the last 10 years, I think we are able to channelize almost about 63 million kgs of material, which otherwise large part of it would have gone in the landfills, as a usable material to the people. We are also able to do almost about 96,000 rural development projects, and a large part of these projects are actually water, sanitation, environment kind of projects. And so it's a concept of reviving the barter economy with many new currencies. On one side, you have urban underutilized material. On the other side, you have the wisdom and the hard work of people. So just to show you now, this is the loop. We collect material, it goes through rigorous process, then it goes to the villages. Next. And the model, the way it operates is that, suppose we spend, say, X amount of money, the surplus material, which otherwise was literally a cars or a material for the landfill, is a new non-monetary currencies for us, which is cloth, utensil, footwear, whole lot of reusable materials, which is 2x. And then we talk about the urban, rural, labor, wisdom, local resources. So if you are creating a bamboo bridge, every family will get a bamboo and a few days of labor. And then that's how it also brings ownership, because when you make it, you maintain it. There is a sense of ownership. So if we calculate all those resources at 2x, this is a model where if you spend X money, your working capital is actually 5x. Because in this process, material is a currency, wisdom is a currency, labor is a currency, local resources are a currency. And this is where the community participation really, really becomes huge. Also, very important part here is the decision making. If me and you go under a program, we will go and say every village will have a road. But when the decision making is gone in the hands of community can very well decide that no, road is secondary, reviving my water body is the first part. Or post-disaster, we can come up with these schemes of creating roads or infrastructure and all. But the community comes back and says, no, we need to clean up our water body first, because the worst affected infrastructure and the most important thing which happened in the village or in the community is actually a water body. Where you have dead cattle to the leftover material of relief or the polythenes of relief. So that's how the prioritization, the decision making is gone in the hands of people. Next. And one organization which always, which was talking about that why do we need a disaster to stand with people? Because economic and social poverty is a disaster. If we see the timeline, 1999 we started, and since 1999 till 2024, we have been able to, respond to any big or small disaster in this huge country. This also gave us a chance to really involve people, build those communities in a big way. We never went there as a relief organization that you just create a kit, distribute, and come back. We go there, and that's how the SARRD concept is coming up, which Meenakshi will talk, which is already established, which is in practice, because that's where people actually become a stakeholder of this entire work. So these are the kind of work we do. Next. Data I have already shared. See, these are the works, post-disaster, pre-disaster, people really get involved. When the bridge is broken, when the road is broken, to stop the flow of the water, to create a temporary bamboo bridge, which can be, because, disaster comes with a lot of infrastructure loss and people need some immediate solutions. By the time the schemes come up, by the time the big infrastructure projects happen, people have to cross the river. And this is where, if you see the picture of bridge, 100% local resources, local wisdom. And after this, when they receive the relief material, it's no more a charity. Even a kg of rice, right? Or a blanket, you go, you distribute, go tomorrow, say this blanket belongs to me or I gave you, people will say yes. But then they got involved in the disaster recovery work or in the mitigation work in a big way, and then got a blanket as a reward. You go and say that this blanket is mine. The person has the right to tell you that it might be yours, but I've earned it. So the entire language and the dynamics are really, really changing. Next. So this is another initiative where we are going to the communities now and, making them much more, say, responsible for their own work. We're calling it Gram Sabhiman, which is thinking differently about yourself, where you do not consider yourself a victim of something, but someone who can play a role in saving the environment, safeguarding the environment, and responding to something, some crisis in a bigger way. Next. Just to give you some more glimpses of absolute localized solution with the local wisdom. So if you see these three pictures, these pictures also, all are water related pictures, but all are all depends on the local wisdom. Okay. And that's how these are sustained, because we are not bringing any outside knowledge. This is the wisdom of the local people. That's how they've been dealing with these, disasters, and especially the water and whole lot of other issues. They understand it. It's just that you have to build that community and show faith in them and the localized solution, and see how things really come up. Next. This is mangrove in a big way, because whole lot of people are thinking that making walls, big brick walls, are a solution to stop tsunami. I always wonder how will that happen. But if you see the mangroves, which are the biggest possible natural walls, which have been safeguarding these, coastal areas, somehow now, so we are reviving that in a big way. Not only we, whole lot of other institutions are also doing that, because we understand that we might not be able to stop a cyclone, but we can certainly control the impact of the cyclone on people's life if we go with these kind of traditional wisdom. I'll stop here, and maybe we can take questions later on. Many over to you. You want to cover the SARRD thing?
And so we have a question in the chat.
Yeah, tell me.
You can respond it before we keep moving forward.
Can someone read that out? I'm not.
How did you ensure sustainability and equity in impact from your intervention?
So I think I've largely answered that, because the moment you remove the demeaning words like donor and beneficiary, okay, because if you see this entire model, what Goonj is providing with the support of hundreds and thousands of people in the city is a family kit, right, which has material from maybe dry ration to whatever is needed in that area. And we start calling ourselves a donor because we are giving it. I mean, that's the most common word in this world. And the people if you saw those pictures, the people who have given in this entire exercise, the bamboos, the stones, the wisdom, the labor, everything, they are unfortunately still called beneficiary. Although, I mean, either both of us should be called beneficiary or both of us should be called donor, because at the end of the day, they are also contributing in a big way. So if I spend time, this is the time of a donor, but when the community spends time, that's the time of a beneficiary. These are absolute double standard. I think in our case, we have been able to sustain in a big way because of 2-3 reasons, to be honest. One is the language, which is not about donor and beneficiary, but about a stakeholder, that all of us are doing it together, and whatever we can bring, we are bringing. So someone is bringing money, someone is bringing material, someone is bringing a skill, wisdom, bamboo, whatever. So it's basically working together. Also, very important is giving due respect to each other. Third thing is that not doing any kind of, it's a very inclusive kind of thing. So when you're going and digging a well, you are not going and using the term that people who know how to dig a well come and dig, because digging well is only 4 people's job, but all other work related to digging that well, right from removing the extra material to fixing it up, is you need another 20 people. So that's how they do it. And as I said earlier, that sustainability happens because there is a sense of ownership. Right? They are not doing it for an NGO or a government or a CSR or something. The work is decided by them, is prioritized by them. It is their skill which is being used. it is their labor which is being used. So when you make it, you maintain it. I mean, that's how large part of our work is sustained. And the good news is that a large number of these works, I spoke about 96,000 such activities in the last 10 years. Thousands of these activities are ultimately taken over by the government and other agencies. Okay, so because we don't use cement in our work, but those agencies actually put a lot of cement and other stuff to make it proper. I mean, in the sense that so that it sustains for many, many more years. Hope I answered. Some of these things will look very, we might feel that no, these are very, in theories, these are good. In practical, it is not. But I think with the body of work for the last 26 years, I mean, we can say that large part of it is not just theories. It's a people work. I mean, if people are respected, if people become a stakeholder, the way they respond is completely different. I mean, that's what we have learned in this journey.
Thank you, Ashu. Minaski, over to you.
Yes. Yeah, thank you. No, I wanted to also cover the other part of it. I saw her comment about the language. And one of the key things that we came to understand about this inequitable kind of a relationship or the responses which were happening was the language. And we started to do various campaigns among the masses who were not affected by a disaster, but who were wanting to connect or respond after a disaster for relief work. So we started to work in a non-disaster time with the other stakeholders. We go to schools, we talk to, we do social media campaigns. Even now, this year, we've had campaigns around floods, talking to people about, this floods is no more a subject of any particular geography in India or any other part of the world. It is happening. It has been happening in many places which had never seen floods. So the language of beneficiary and donor, the thinking of that otherness which we create with, somebody's affected by a disaster as a victim and all of those things. So those campaigns have kind of worked on the mindset of people who contribute at the time of a disaster. We have a whole series of social media posts and campaigns which talks about some of the myths people have around disasters and disaster affected people. So they basically, then you're trying to say that, just because there have been a few deaths in a disaster doesn't mean it's a small disaster, because even people who have survived have to go back to completely damaged ecosystems, damaged homes, and their livelihoods are all damaged. So it is that kind of awareness and getting people to understand the modalities of what happens actually after a disaster in the short term and in the long term. So on the right, you'll see this poster about winters, for example. We've been consistently for the last 26 years been talking about winters as an ongoing disaster, every year, annual disaster. So people come together and then contribute not with a sense of, as a charity or something, but as their way of connecting with something, their way of being a stakeholder in creating a better ecosystem. I'm just trying to I'm struggling a little bit with the slides presentation. Just bear with me. So yeah, so similarly, we've been for the past year or so, we've been doing disaster exhibition again to get the masses to see the realities, to understand and empathize, but not as a sympathy and poor thing, to talk about the resilience of people, to talk about various aspects of disasters which go otherwise unnoticed. We've been holding these exhibitions in India in schools, in colleges, among development sector peers, in international forums. We were presenting this at on the sidelines of SCOL. We were trying to talk about it on the sidelines of the UNGA. Idea being that we must get more dialogue happening about disasters in non-disaster time, in a place where people are able to understand different facets of it. So with that, I wanted to kind of take a pause and ask all of us here as to what do you think is a disaster? If you can possibly maybe mention it into one or two lines, or just your sense of what does it do? What is a disaster in your mind? And then it'll help us to kind of unpack what SARRD is talking about. If you can even write in your on the chat, if you can mention what do you think is a disaster.
Meenakshi, meantime, people is thinking and sharing about what they think is a disaster, and also feel free to raise your hand and open your mics.
Yes, please.
I want to ask you a question that is in the chat and is connected with what you just mentioned about the engagement of the society, which is how do you engage with collaborators? So how you make people to be more proactive in disaster preparedness rather than have reactive panic.
It many a times, it's a very circular thing. There are collaborators who connect with us at the time of a disaster, in the relief phase, and they want to kind of do relief work with us, and that becomes an opportunity to. It's like in a simple term, it's a foot in the door kind of a situation where they enter and start to get exposed to a disaster situation through the relief work. But many a times, even the people where they've been collaborating with us on development work, and those communities get affected by a disaster because that keeps happening time and again. And so it's a cyclical thing of where a collaborator comes to work with us, and then we kind of start to get them to understand and get exposed to the realities and different complexities of going from a disaster to development work, or going from development work to disaster. So it kind of keeps working in both ways. But most times the biggest challenge which we've kind of faced in disasters is that most resources come to us with a limited timeline to it. Typically it's like relief work done, and maybe max rehabilitation work, and then it kind of comes to end. Whereas our conversation with the collaborators is usually that you need a longer trajectory of involvement, engagement, and resourcing of those communities to really kind of stand with them in their vulnerabilities. Because typically, as you know, Gabby, that media attention and all kind of wanes down after the initial week, 2 weeks, or maximum month or so. And then it kind of, the resources also go down. So that's it's a continuous cycle of engaging with our collaborators on this. I hope that answers your question.
Yes. Yes. We have a few comments in the chat, but before going there, we have Lubna. You have your hands up. Please, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. That was my question. Thank you, Gabby, and great presentation. Thank you so much for the work. And my question actually was more on, I would love to connect you with other groups that I'm working with, that we have the very same ethos, from changing language, from disaster preparedness, and having applied more scenario planning, because we're all, disaster is I think a total disruption to someone's life, and it happens at scale when it hits the whole community. But yeah, so that's what I wanted to know, if how we can collaborate, because we have some things we're working on in real time. Thank you.
Would love to collaborate with them.
I would love it. We have this water guardianship also, because the water, we start from the water, we have to so there's lots, but I'm gonna, I'm so happy. I'm very grateful. I think it's divine intervention we're getting on this call.
Thank you. That's very sweet of you to say. I'm trying to see if there are any questions. Cindy, Gabby, if you notice any other questions, or we go on.
Well,
I
there
think
are
many should cover SARRD first.
Okay. 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 Let me finish talking. I'll try and finish it as quickly as possible. I'll not try and go into a lot of detail. So, as I was saying, and I think the word that I see on the chat is disruption, and disruption happening at scale, as Lubna said, is what we are noticing. So why do we need to rethink climate emergencies? The nature of, or the frequency, the nature of disasters, where they've been happening. When we started Goonj, we were constantly hearing that there are certain parts of India which have annual floods. But today, last year there were, I think, 8 to 10 states, which are parts of 8 to 10 states in India, which were affected. This year, there have been more. In other parts of the world, which had never seen floods, are seeing floods. The frequency is increased. The geographies which are touched are increased. As you can see, the acceleration with which it is happening has all kind of gone up. So we were trying to sort of understand what all needs to change for us to have some kind of very calibrated, very well thought out response. So change of language and thinking, as we was just saying, from victims to think of the people who are affected, from victims to stakeholders, from disasters being just an aberration to factoring it into the reality of what we live day to day, how we come together. Can it be only that organizations like Goonj and others who are, just the experts, so-called, to everyone getting involved? That's why we are insisting on talking about the societal approach or societal involvement. Change how we finance, because we talked about money and philanthropic money and other innovative finance and all that, but also many other different currencies which need to be thought about, mapped, and put into action. And of course, how we do the work it can't be program project based. It needs to be systemic and long term. So we all know about in a trajectory of how things are going on and the disruptions happens, and that becomes a point of a disaster. And our attention really goes to those people, those geographies, and all the resources, all the experts, so-called, start to converge to that place and start to work on that. But if I see how things are changing, we're having more and more disasters. We are going from one disaster to another, and there is almost patterns emerging, but patterns which are not. We can see them in the going backwards, but not forwards, because the uncertainty of when and where a disaster will happen, one doesn't know. So if we were to just look at any given disaster and think about what are the different aspects or different phases of it, there is, of course, a risk-prone area. There is a before a disaster, there is a during a disaster, after a disaster, and then it goes from relief to rehabilitation and then to the development phase. So I'm just trying to kind of map it in the simplest way. Of course, it changes from disaster to disaster, floods and cyclones and earthquakes and fires and all. But largely, those are the phases we can look at. So from moving or paying our attention to a disaster, that geography, those people, to paying attention to all different aspects and all different phases of what a disaster does. It also kind of looks into the aspect that a disaster happening in any part of the country or any part of the world has a ripple effect, which kind of falls out into the immediate stakeholders and proximate people, then others, and it kind of pans out as you see the arrows on the outside. And the connections then are either broken or not. So this is a picture of after tsunami. Most times what happens is that when there is the connection is not there between the most people who are most far away from a disaster site, then the mismatch of what is needed by the people. So these are clothes which were given by people, but they ended up not being taken by the most affected people because they were not matched with what people needed. Not because they were bad clothes or anything, but because they were not matched to the needs. They were not given with the kind of specificity or matching of what and where people were. And that's why they ended up getting completely wasted, the resources getting completely wasted. So the Kerala floods is where Goonj worked. We were trying to kind of do it at scale. We were trying to match from different phases of disasters, the changing needs. So at one place in the beginning, there was a need for food and other basics. At another level, it was utensils and other things. Then at another phase, it was livelihood and other aspects. So it changes, but as the gap between the most closest and the most farthest people keeps on building, the connections keep getting broken. This is again stories from the ground of, this is from Bihar, about how people who were affected by floods then came together to make a school out of the bamboo. If you see the walls all made by bamboo, these are the people who are most affected, but they needed a school, so they came together and made a school. So it's not just about us, who are looking at a disaster affected community from the outside. It is also about how people who are most affected, how they prioritize some issues and how they start to work on that. And how can we kind of match what they need for themselves? So idea being that on the left, if you see that is the disaster point, but there are so many different players or stakeholders which come into close attention to the disaster point or the people. And then if you see on the right, on the outside, it is the communities, the rest of the world, literally, who has very little idea or understanding about what a disaster affected place is going through, what are the people going through. But this orange round thing can any day go to this side on the right, and one of those communities could be a disaster affected, and the rest of the people would be looking at that with the same lens. So the predictability of where that disaster can be and how to talk to those communities can change or is changing actually every day. And how would then we be able to respond to this moving or uncertainty of disasters where we don't know who will be affected, how they'll be affected, or how will we come to know and respond? So this is what we were trying to think about, that we talked about the before, during, after, and development phase, and we talked about the risk. So the idea being, we talk about connecting and pre-committing resources. We are talking about, of course, contributing at the time of a disaster to relief work and all. But that continues in terms of support, in terms of learning from that disaster, and then going into the development phase with the lens of attention to what we learned from that disaster. So it's almost cyclical from development to risk to a disaster site and then again to development. So it's a loop which I was talking about earlier, which keeps playing on. So in terms of connecting, who is the most affected? How can I connect to and learn from them? See, this is where I think we want to play the biggest emphasis, because most times when we talk about disaster affected people, we do not think of them as having something that we should learn from. But the fact of the matter is that when we see, whether people who are affected by floods in Bihar or in West Bengal, they are the closest to the nature, they are closest to their rivers, they're closest to their forests, they're closest to their land. For them to understand and have a clear sense of how things are changing and how things are moving towards something, those are the places to learn from. And then, of course, committing of resources. Like I was saying earlier, that commitment of resources, usually as social entrepreneurs, many of you would know that the biggest challenge when a disaster happens, and we've faced it many a times in the last 26 years, is one, you have to respond. A disaster has happened, a flood has happened. One, you have to respond urgently to the people's needs. But on the other hand, you also have to try and get the resources going. So it's almost parallel kind of a challenge which you have to work against, and time is of essence. So if you have pre-commitment of resources that, when a disaster happens, we committing in a non-disaster time to giving this much or contributing this much, that is when actually a response at a time of a disaster changes. It just triggers almost a chain reaction, which really responds to people very well. The moving to the continuing part is where the ripple effect of disasters is what you start to notice. You start to actually learn from the disaster affected people. You learn from where the ripple effects of that is happening, and that learning is really comes to then inform the development work, or the long-term work which needs to be built with these communities, but also with other stakeholders in the world. So this is some of the different roles that various other stakeholders can play, whether it is academia with trying to capture or understand from each disaster, what are the learnings, how are things changing, the non-profits who work with communities who are affected, how they allow for their decision making and their priorities to come from the ground up. How can the corporates mobilize pre-committed resources? How can media continue to engage after the relief phase is over, so that the learning from a disaster can move to the rest of the society in a stronger, in a more resilient way? And of course, the most important, I guess, is how can industry change some of its practices, or at least examine some of its practices to mitigate future disasters? Because as all of you would agree, many a times the root causes of disasters are not with the most affected communities. The root causes actually are sitting somewhere else, and those root causes can only be looked at where there is engagement with different stakeholders, and there is learning from these disasters for industry and other stakeholders. So there's learning from disasters is perhaps the most important piece from Goonj's work in the last 26 years on disasters, that the disaster affected people have a lot to share. We have a lot to share from working on these disasters. We shared the timeline of working on 40 plus, or I think 50 plus different disasters in the last 26 years, where each disaster taught us something more. Each disaster taught the stakeholders, the partners, the grassroots, social entrepreneurs, many different things, and the course correction therefore happened for the next one and the next one. So it's a continuous learning and adaptation work which needs to emerge. So this is the connecting, the committing, the contributing, continuing to learn and to co-create. So in a very simple way, we've tried to talk about how an alliance of these various stakeholders with pre-committed resources, plus a secretariat, which will be, from our perspective, we see social entrepreneurs as being the most dynamic and adaptive to disasters. So something which can either be done with a group of social entrepreneurs. Goonj is doing it with a whole network of grassroots partners in rural India and in urban India. And Goonj, in this diagram, Goonj can be considered as an example of a secretariat. But the key elements would be standing and learning from the vulnerable communities and grassroots social entrepreneurs. Standing, of course, in the time of a disaster, but as they go from relief to rehabilitation to development, also learning from them, learning with them, learning platform to be there, to be created from that learning from the ground up, and that learning then moving to the alliance partners, but also to other stakeholders, whether it is the development sector peers, or education in schools and colleges, in the way we talk about in our work through exhibitions, through panels, through conversations like this, to actually mainstream the issue of disasters, not as an aberration, but as something we'll have to kind of factor into our development work as well. And it's a continuous loop which keeps moving as we go. So in many ways, this is not a technical solution. It is a framework of thinking. It is a framework of coming together. We are going ahead with this work of socializing this thinking, socializing this framework with the Goonj Knowledge and Research Institute that we started this year. We are talking to various social entrepreneurs in different countries. There is a series of sessions coming up after this introductory session, and we are talking about working with or sharing what we have learned with other social entrepreneurs in other countries. With that, I can't see anyone, but I'm going to stop sharing. I hope that was useful. I would love to hear your comments and any thoughts.
Thank you, Meenakshi. We have 3 questions for you and a lot of comments, but thank you so much for the presentation. I want to start with the questions because some of them are really, really interested. And first, Alan mentioned that disasters are more predictable than people appreciate. Just the scale and timing are not known. How do you work in areas of known risk from a planning point of view? So, Anshu, I don't know if
I can. So, one is this entire cloth for work approach is certainly preparing for something, I mean, when you know that these are drought prone areas, you make sure that you have a lot of work to make sure that every drop of rainwater we can store so that the impact of drought is reduced. So it's a constant effort on this cloth for work kind of activities which are related to disasters. Second, also in many areas, as the immediate response, we create a lot of hubs, right? So these are like, you can imagine a depot kind of stuff where within few hours, I suppose southern India, Alan, as you've seen part of India, that southern India, say suppose we will create a hub where if a disaster happens anywhere, within 12 hours, the first lot of material will reach there. So there is complete preparedness for this, right? From say life-saving jackets to the tarpaulins and tents. That's what we keep ready across the country. We also understand that these are the areas which will be cut off in the flood. So like we know that you see the pattern and you know that this area will be cut off, say from the highways and all that. But if you create a depot inside that area, then also you can respond much faster. Maybe you can just use a boat there and you can respond. But so connectivity from the larger world, will not happen. But connectivity within that area happens. So that's how we prepare ourselves in a big way. And because this cloth for work and all is a constant exercise, to be honest, communities themselves are very well prepared to tackle with some of these areas, some of these disasters.
So just to add to Anshu's point, I think the many activities that you saw in the beginning when we were talking about Goonj's work, in the development time, there is a conversation about, okay, when there is a predictable understanding, okay, there is going to be monsoon floods or there is going to be some kind of disruption at a certain time of the year, then the development work also orients towards that, how can we mitigate that? People then come up with various solutions like making check dams or, cleaning, desilting their ponds and all. So those are solutions which emerge from ground up. And those are solutions which people then are able to sustain and learn from. So they learn that, okay, this we did this year. So this year's monsoon, we were able to handle much better. But if we added this much, then we will, sustain it more. It'll be much better next time. The idea being that people have a lot of intelligence about their own ecosystems, their own village or own geography ecosystems. And how do we tap into that together with everything else. So it's not to say that there isn't intelligence that can come from outside, but I think the people know the very best. I mean, it's one simple example that, when people make a bridge, a bamboo bridge in a village, now the people out there from that village know how much water will come up in the monsoon. So the height of the bridge will accordingly, they will make it basis, okay, we need to have it of this height so that it can handle. If we had a engineer from outside coming, they would probably have some kind of a basic or whatever, a standardized information about, okay, the bridge needs to be this tall. So it is really driven from what people's intelligence or sensing is about their own disasters, in those, predictable kind of, or mapped out kind of disasters.
Thank you, Minashki. We have another question from Raj. What other currencies besides monetary are being considered?
I mean, we have already spoken about material, wisdom, bamboo, stone, soil. I mean, the fact remains that in many of these work, someone will offer a tractor, someone will offer diesel for that. I mean, that's the community participation. Okay, so I mean, most of these works, to be honest, on the spot, we don't spend money. On the logistics and all we do. But if you see all these examples which you saw, right from local tools to local material like literally bamboo and stone, as I said, all actually comes from community. And the wisdom comes from community. And the most important part is, like Meenakshi was telling, that in on those river, if we from the urban India or urban, with urban education setup, we will say, okay, our education has taught us that 3 feet above the river, we have to make a bridge, suppose, right? Only the local community knows that in the month of July, the water will come 7 feet above. Okay, so unless you make it 8 feet, the bridge will not work. That wisdom is only there with the local community, not just as a wisdom, but as an experience, because they live with it every year. So I think the most important part is that we respect that, and we also, listen to them. And we understand that even when we were not there, they used to make those bridges earlier. I'll stop here because I think we're short of time. How many?
No, I just wanted to add that there are various other currencies. So there are a lot of people who actually also give their services at that point. Some transportation companies give us logistic support. There are people in urban India who give us spaces. If at a time of a disaster, when we are doing a lot of mobilization of resources, people give their spaces. People give their skills. Somebody will design some program or something. So people contribute with what they can. So money is not just people give time, people give their networking. There are so many different, it's just that we have not actually tried to monetize, to be honest. I mean, we feel little off trying to put a money term on all of those currencies, but definitely those currencies, that's why Anshu showed the initial slide of money is 1x and then 2x and 2x. So there are multiple currencies which come into play, and it just adds to have much larger capital available for response.
Thank you so much, Minashki. Thank you, Anshu. We are almost on time. Actually, we are on time. There are a lot of comments in the chat about what you think about disasters. That will help Minashki and Anshu to frame the next sessions. Remember, this is part of a series. So I want to say thank you to all of you. Thank you to Minashki and Anshu for a wonderful session. And I want to pass it to Cindy, because if you felt that this was an interesting series, well, stay tuned, because we have more sessions in the next month that I'm sure that you will enjoy. So Cindy, over to you.
Thank you so much, Gabby, and thank you, Meenakshi and Anshu. As we mentioned, sorry for cutting it short, but don't worry, we have 3 other sessions in which our speakers will have the opportunity to answer all the questions. So please feel free to fill out the poll so we can have the opportunity to learn from what you liked or not and improve the sessions for for our upcoming ones. Meanwhile, as we mentioned, for the disaster preparedness learning series, this is the first one, which was just an overview, as you saw, of the series and of SARRD framework. Meanwhile, starting from October 7, October 30, and November 3rd, we will explore more regional issues. So basically, we'll start with LATAM, with Africa, and conclude with South Asia. You will find all the links in the chat to register. And also, if you are from any of these regions and you are interested to learn more on how to apply the SARRD framework in your countries and regions, feel free to reach out to me, and maybe we can see and you can be part as well of the speakers and to share more about your story. Meanwhile, a part of this series, for those who are interested in fundraising, we will meet on October 28th for the last session with Black Fox. And there will also be a concluding one on the fundraising sessions that we've done for the whole year. So in case you have attended, prepare your questions and you will have the opportunity to ask the experts. Thank you once again for joining. Also check out our Medium platform and we will see you soon with the continuation of the series. So thank you once again to Gabby, Menakshi and Anshu, and as well as Alian, who is here and has helped us a lot to create these sessions. So yeah, we will see you next week. Have a nice rest of the day, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.